Third hour of the program, Quebec's Conservative Party leader Eric Duhaime says it's time for the Quebec government to tighten its belt. And he's calling for the elimination of 20,000 public service jobs. He's citing a poll that he commissioned that shows that most Quebecers believe that government spending is wasteful. Let's dive into that with Eric Duhaime himself. He's on the line. Eric, welcome back to the program.
It's always a pleasure, Elias. Thank you.
Toujours en forme?
Of course I am, indeed.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about this. I got to say, 20,000 sounds like a whopper, but maybe you could put it in perspective. Just how big of a cut is it if you want to cut 20,000 public service jobs?
Well, why do we need to cut jobs, first off, is because the government size, it's overweight. I mean, obviously, under the CAQ government over the last 6 years, the spending went up by 48%. So there's nobody who's listening to us or almost who had such an increase in terms of income. The government is spending more than ever. Secondly, the size of the government. There's now 72,000 more people working for the Quebec government, and just in the public work, it's over 10,000. And during the election campaign, as you recall, the government, the CAQ, said that they wanted to cut the size of the public service by 5,000 jobs. Not only did they not fulfill their commitment, but they also increased it by another 10,000. So we say enough is enough. There's about 80,000 bureaucrats right now just in the public work. We think that we could easily cut it by 1/4.
Okay, but what about the teachers, the nurses, the doctors? Okay. Where's the cut going to happen?
There's a difference between the bureaucracy and the public services that you're talking about. So we're not talking here about nurses or physicians or professors. We're just talking of the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy right now is 80,000 people, and we think it's time to cut 20 of those 80,000 people.
So let me just ask you, one of the parts of Quebec where you do relatively well, if you look at polling, is Quebec City. That's a government town. A lot of people work for the government in Quebec City, and they're bureaucrats, by the way, the type of person you'd eliminate here. So are you going to run in Quebec City, say, hey, we want you to lose your job?
Well, at one point, we have to stop looking at how many votes we're going to get or not. We need to propose what is good for Quebecers. And also, the second thing that might surprise people in Montreal is that people who are supporting the most the cut in the bureaucracy are people working in the Quebec's capital, because that's where they see the waste. They see that it doesn't work. They see their neighbors or their relatives who work for the government, and that they're not efficient. I mean, it's much easier to see it when you're witnessing it next door than when you're far away. And I mean, it shouldn't be a partisan debate. We should look at it from a sustainable perspective. We cannot increase the size of the state forever. The size of the government cannot become more and more important year after year after year in Quebec's economy and in the budget. We're going to have a budget table on March 25th in a few days, and we currently have a systemic deficit, and we need to solve it. And the main problem is the income of those bureaucrats, and we need to cut somewhere, and that's how we think where it should start.
With Eric Duhaime, leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec. Eric, listen, when you talk about this kind of stuff, especially now in light of everything that's going on, and it's happening to conservatives across the country, federal and provincial conservatives, when you talk like this, you're likened to Donald Trump, right? I want you to listen to Donald Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. Here's a snippet of what she said in the press briefing room in Washington, D.C. this week.
In Quebec, the highest tax rate for an income of $150,000 or more is 53.3%. More than half of Canadians' incomes they are being taxed on.
So even the White House is talking about Quebec's tax rate, but I wonder if it also paints you in that corner where you and your party are too Trump-esque for Quebecers and Canadians right now. What do you say to that?
Well, what I just heard is a fact. It's not even ideological. It's not political. It's the fact that, and it's true, Quebecers are the most taxed citizen in North America, and it needs to stop. I mean, it's not a prize that I'm very proud of, actually, and I don't think a lot of Quebecers are proud of being the most taxed citizen in the continent. So it's not, and I understand that the current American administration is doing that. I understand also that there's a Dutch down in the state that is also cutting the size of the government. But our governments are very different. We have a parliamentary system, a British parliamentary system, that where there's not a non-elected official like Elon Musk that could be at the head of a department, and it's not a president who is governing by decree. It's not. I mean, our political systems are very, very different. And that's why we, even if we have the same, we realize the same problems, our solution have to be a bit different because our systems are different.
So maybe it's got to be a Quebec version, right? You just mentioned all the things that are different about our systems, but does Quebec need its own Doge?
Of course. What we propose currently, because it doesn't work the way the Americans work. It should be done by the Conseil du Trésor, the Treasury Board. It should be the Treasury Board and government efficiency, and we think that's where the waste needs to be cut, and they should be in charge of it. And it's not actually, it did happen in the past and not far away. If you look at what did the Jean Chrétien government when Paul Martin was finance minister, they did the same kind of exercise of reviewing every single program, and they started to cut the federal bureaucracy. When Stephen Harper took over with the Conservatives a few years later, he continued and even asked to each of his department and each of his ministers to bring up a proposal where they were cutting between 5 and 10% in every single department. Mm-hmm. And even closer to us here in Quebec, Lucienne Robillard, who's a former minister, provincially and federally, tabled a very important report 11 years ago calling for the same kind of review of every program in Quebec. And that's exactly what today the Conservative Party of Quebec is proposing.
Why do you think you can succeed in a spot where, the CAQ, they came to power in 2018 and they were promising this, right? Remember, it was that party came from the ADQ and other more right, especially economically, more right-leaning parties in Quebec. And they were promising big. They were going to do things different. Yeah. And as it turns out, the CAQ is governed like previous governments when it comes to bloat and bureaucracy. Why do you think you can succeed when other people who have promised in this province have failed?
Because I think, François Legault was not sincere when he told us that. I mean, François Legault didn't come from the ADQ. He came from the Parti Québécois. And the kind of government that we're having right now is a Parti Québécois 2.0 without a referendum. I mean, the same guy is applying the same policies as he was when he was a Parti Québécois minister. And I think that's the problem. He told us what we wanted to hear to get our votes during the election campaign. I mean, me personally, people could say everything against what I'm proposing, and they have a right to. It's their own opinion. But they cannot accuse me of not being faithful to my beliefs. I mean, I started with a party at 1%. With 400 members, and I went there not because I wanted to win, but because I wanted to propose something different to Quebecers, and I'm there for the good reason. I think Legault was looking too much for power and not enough on principles.
Eric, we're going to have to leave it there. Always a pleasure catching up with you. Thanks so much.
Merci beaucoup, Elias. Au revoir.
À la prochaine. Eric Duhaime is the leader of the Quebec Conservative Party.